It's on.
Hello, everyone. This is Eric Johnson, the brand.
And Aaron Thigpen, the source.
Aaron, today's topic is something that's coming up pretty regularly when we're hearing that from a training and a baseball standpoint, competition standpoint, and all the sports. How do athletes simulate competition right now? They haven't played since March 11th or done any type of sport activity since March 11th. You know, that's a big deal right now. They're getting what? They're getting antsy, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's a tricky sort of situation for a lot of these athletes. I think you've got to figure out different ways to challenge and compete during your training. Maybe having different sorts of games and measuring and setting up those sorts of things within, you know, a training or a practice environment to kind of get those competitive juices flowing.
You know, it's really funny. The other day, you and I were working one of our classes, Hit Dynamics, part of our hardball athletics genre. And one of the players said to me, Coach EJ, are we going to, you know, it's the last round, are we going to play a game? And it got me thinking, Aaron, that these guys are really, you know, thirsting for any type of competition, whether it's a organized thing or is it in practice, as you mentioned, is it within the practice of a team type setting organized and they're just playing a simulated game or something. Guys are really thirsty for that. And I think it's important as trainers, coaches, that we help our athletes with this moving forward.
Yeah, and from this training standpoint, you know, again, you're generally by yourself if you're training or working out. Great ways to do that is to measure your activity. So you might time an activity, or you might clock an activity in terms of maybe velocity, or maybe you get some of these devices that if you're hitting off a tee at home, that you start to measure, you know, some of those things that are important there, you know, bat speed or hand speed or whatever, and use that feedback, which is important from a training standpoint, but also as a way of being competitive. And maybe you take that another step and you get a couple of your buddies and you guys all have the same sorts of devices. You don't have to necessarily be in the same place, but maybe you guys have a tournament. I mean, one thing we used to do when I was in college is we had all these track guys and we loved computer games. And we would actually have tournaments on, you know, Madden or whatever.
Oh, okay.
You know,
all right.
So, but you can do the same sort of thing.
Right.
Maybe you guys have, not Zep, is it? Cause
Blast.
But yeah, so everyone has
Baseball.
a blast, and everyone gets whatever 25 swings.
Right.
And you have an elimination tournament based on who has the highest average bat speed.
Right.
Or, you know, whatever measurables that you want to do. And you can put those things together informally as a group and maybe challenge each other. And then maybe you challenge other groups.
Right.
You know, teams can even do that where you have some kind of leaderboards for the week.
Absolutely.
And, you know, that might be a way of getting kids engaged. They all don't have to be in the same spot, but
it's a good way to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the leaderboard component is very important because we use Blast Baseball in our entities, and I think one thing they've recommended to us is having these leaderboards because it's easy because the players aren't in the same place because of COVID,
right?
And so they can take videos of each other. They can post all their stuff and send it up, and they could actually make their own website,
Right.
and they could make their own league playing with this apparatus of
Right.
Blast. But what you recommended there with the leaderboard, I think, is outstanding. I think that's a good way, especially when if players don't want to get out there in public and they want to do something, and
Right.
I think it's a good way. And all you need is a bow net and a tee, and you got the sensor in the bat. It's going to tell you the speed you're swinging at,
Right.
hand speed, and it applies different metrics. So, Aaron, I think that's a great subject, a great thing to happen for these guys, because we're going to have to invent games right now with the current situation we're in, where really practices now are in smaller groups. You can't have 3 teams at a tournament here in California doing stuff. All these counties are locked down right now, but what you can do is provide something differently. For instance, like in practice, I try to play what we call red, white, and blue. You have 3 teams. You got 1 team in the infield, 1 team in the outfield, and 1 team hitting. You got the kids socially distanced, and you play a simulated game. You got a pitcher and a catcher in each group, and they're playing against each other. And you have 3 different teams trying to score as many runs and all that different stuff. So that's I think that is really critical for athletes who have been training for now, 13, 14 weeks?
Yeah.
That sound about right? That are engaged? That they get that in. So I think that's a good way to start. I think baseball or any other sport in the fall could be, we don't know what's happening. I think this thing's fluid every day, Aaron. So, we can assume a lot of different things. I'm not going to make any assumptions. But I think athletes need to be doing these games right now.
No, I think it's a way to keep you engaged, to keep the competitive juices flowing, and kind of satisfy that thirst that you were talking about.
Let me ask you this, Aaron, because when kids start playing games again, regardless of what sport they're in, they're going to be sore, right? I mean, they're getting that drilling going again, all that's happening again. How do they recover?
Yeah.
Because I think that's something that people just say, we're just going to play games, and all of a sudden I'm sore now, 12, 13 weeks later.
Right.
How do you recover in that, too, if they want to play these games? What's the best way to go about
It's the same protocol you use as if you were having a regular game, So whatever that protocol happens to be for you, you still want to do that. If it's icing down, if it's massaging, if it's, laps or stretching or, vibration, whatever technique, foam rollering, you still have to do the same thing. It's still high intensity physical activity that you have to bring your body down from. So there's no change. Just because it's a game doesn't add any more levity to the seriousness of how you should be approaching it, both, before and post. So, and again, what I mean by before is the proper warm-up.
Right.
So,
right.
That also keeps your body in the right mode, in the right sequence of how you're doing things.
Right.
So whether it's a 9-inning game or a 20-minute,
right.
Fun game, you still follow the same protocols because your body's going to need that. Otherwise, then, games become risky, and that's when athletes get hurt.
And I think another note needs to be said is that, you're starting to play, if you're going to play these type games, understand, from a pitching standpoint or a catching standpoint, which are probably the two most important positions on the field that start this thing, if we're talking from a baseball standpoint. Maybe, limit the amount of pitches the pitcher's throwing and the amount of innings a catcher. You're not going to stick a catcher back there for 7 innings and they haven't been playing for 12 weeks, or you're going to throw a guy 50 pitches. Take that back to, it's almost like spring training, right? Would you say that it's kind of like you got to start it off like that in order for players to get back into what I call game shape?
Yeah, I agree. You got to kind of segue yourself into it, and the good thing about that is if you're doing shorter bouts, is you may be able to do more frequent bouts too, because you give yourself a little bit more chance to recover, but you're taking these smaller bites.
Right.
So that might work for some athletes in conditioning them back up to speed.
Right. In simulated games, a lot, and I think this is something. Again, it's a simulated game, so the amount of mistakes, the amount of things that happen are going to be more prevalent in this environment. And I think as coaches, Aaron, and I think you probably attest to this, that we need to be patient with our athletes. How do you feel about that? Because coaching is a interesting situation when you talk about games. Because when you say game, people just go, "Oh, well, we got to pump up the adrenaline." Isn't training in the game supposed to look alike? Your mindset is the same way.
Yeah.
Can you maybe talk about that a little bit as the players get back out in the field and they're starting to play these simulated games or stuff like that? Is the mindset that they need to have?
Well, I mean, I can just kind of tell you from a track and field perspective how I always approached it with my athletes. I don't even call practice. I call practice rehearsal. So, and the reason why I do that is it's to kind of instill the mindset of there's nothing different going on and how I'm going to approach doing things. There's still going to be a focus and intensity. It's just that now those efforts are going towards win or lose versus going towards, my development for this day. So
I like that.
I
really like that.
I think terminology means a lot when you're talking about training and practice. So maybe it's parsing words, by other people, but for me, I think the terminology you put on some of these things can also affect just the psychology of how people see these things and approach them. So, like for instance, I don't really like to use the term warm-up because it's been used, so it's such a generic term, and people kind of take a passive or blasé attitude when you tell them warm-up. And I tell them, no, our warm-up is training. I kind of give them a definition of it. So our warm-up has to be an execution because it's a rehearsal for the things that you're going to do later on in practice. It's not about just getting your blood flow going, because those are that's what people kind of,
equate it to.
Exactly.
So do you call it training, part of your training? What do you,
I say, from the moment you step out here, we're training.
Ooh, I love
everything
that.
We're doing, we're training.
So there's no such thing as a warm up.
I don't use, no, we're training. From the very first activity, whether I say, give me a jog around the track, we are training.
I love that.
And
I love that mindset, because when the kids get into competition, it's like, okay, I'm going to go warm up to play.
Right, exactly. And now you have all these transitions that they have to bridge mentally and physically. And the body follows the mind. So if your mind hasn't made the transition from warm up to play, your body isn't going to make the transition from warm up to play.
That's great. I love that, because you're getting the players, the athletes, ready.
Yeah.
Ready to perform.
Right.
Ready to perform, and I think that's the hardest thing to do, and that's why you're so exceptional at what you do, Aaron. Is that's the most important key there, is to get them, into that mindset of, I'm competing.
Yeah. I mean, I try and make it very casual and just say, hey, look, this is what we do. So it's not any different. And like I said, the only difference is now the outcome, the desired outcome is different, win or lose versus, just being in our regular training environment. But even on a run, there's an assignment. You're going to execute this, and you're going to rehearse certain things so that they come into play, and you don't have to make these big switches. For instance, with baseball players, I always say, okay, if you're a 300 hitter, you get to run the first base. You get
right.
Maybe 1 out of 3 times, okay, or whatever.
Right. That's accurate.
Well, if you don't rehearse that, how are you going to be ready to do it well that one time when you have the opportunity?
Right. So that has to be part of training.
Exactly. It has to be part of training. And everyone works on their hitting, but how many people work on running to first base?
They should be working on that a lot because that is part of the game.
Exactly.
Yes.
So you train like you're going to play. There shouldn't be anything different. Everything that's demanded of you when you're playing should be part of what you're rehearsing in training. Like I said, practice kind of tends to be, for me, a little passive and just doesn't tend to be as serious a term.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend not to use that as much.
This is great because as we return to competition, Aaron, that is a good way to get athletes ready for competition in this simulated game situation without any officials, as they say, and get them back into this mindset of, hey, I've got some competition. So, as we said, that's a good way to end it today, Aaron. I love what you said about this whole thing of training and how it leads to competition. So, signing out, this is Eric Johnson, the brand.
And Aaron Thigpen, the source.
We'll check out next time.